Thank you, everyone, for your presentations. And now we will move on to the question period with the members of our committee. Let us begin with Senator Couture.
Senator McPhedran.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses and for your testimony. A number of times, although you didn't bring it up, I really want to hear your opinion on this particular issue. A number of witnesses have discussed the concerns around the phrase working age, and that the bill limits disability payments to people of working age. I'd just like your thoughts on this. Does it make sense? If not, what should be done with this phrase? Thank you.
Will you be answering? Ms. Dirlo? Well, I think really we have to begin somewhere. You know, it's a good first start, and I think it's a good first step.
Prévost?
Mr. Prévost? Well, I'd add this. Clearly, 65 is the age that figures in a variety of other programs in terms of old age security and so on, and it is something that would be in step with other programs. But as to the income, it should be continuous without any type of a penalty for those people living with disabilities. But I have to consult our members, of course, on this matter.
You've got about another minute,
Great. Well,
Senator Couture, if you want.
In passing, as a person who is disabled, I just want to say that stopping at 65, well, we still have the same costs after that age because we're still handicapped. And it would be something good not to have it stop after age 65 or at age 65.
Monsieur Lupien.
Thank you, Mr. Lupien.
Move on, and then we can come back to the second round.
Absolutely.
So, Senator McPhedran, followed by...
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to witnesses for sharing with us very powerful points of view. I am interested, though, in your reasoning for feeling that there should be no changes whatsoever at this stage. In particular, I'm sure you are well aware that there is no amount. The Canada Disability Benefit has no amount and nothing in this bill that would actually see a livable disability benefit come from it. In fact, it could be as low as $1 that was decided on. So I'm hoping you can help me understand why it is that you feel so much faith in this process when there are so many gaps in the bill still that we have before us.
Who would like to respond? Monsieur Prévost?
Mr. Prévost. Well, given that we have this bill before us, there's also the matter of the duration of the Parliament, and I think it would be to our advantage to see it passed as quickly as possible and then to move on to the regulatory framework. Well, if everybody is working and demonstrating goodwill, there could be coordination, if not perfect coordination, with the provinces and territories. But if not, if you don't believe in it, well, it could turn out not to be the case. So we choose faith. We choose faith and trust in Parliament, in the Senate, and in you all.
Madame Durand-Lot, avez-vous...
Do you have anything to add, Madame Durand-Lot? I'll never get used to this. I'm going to let my colleague Samuel Rago answer. Thank you for the question. It's an excellent question, and there are many questions on the indicators that are used to define poverty. What measure that is used? Is it regionalized or not? And we are just afraid that Parliament will be prorogued or, in fact, dissolved, and we will be once again condemned ad eternum, to live in poverty. People need something. They need it now. They need it right away, not in 5, 10, or 15 years from now. There are people who need it right away. There are people who are living in extreme poverty, and we hope, we expect that it would be not be a $1 benefit. That would be very unpopular, to say the least. We would want the benefit to be a true benefit put forward by the federal government.
Merci beaucoup. Et,
Thank you very much.
Senatrice Petitclerc.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our guests, witnesses, for your thoughtful contributions today. My question has to do with the timeline for the Canada Disability Benefit and the actual rollout of funds. Your organizations, in a joint submission, as well as others to the House of Commons Humour Committee, have recommended an initial implementation phase that provides access to the benefit for recipients of provincial and territorial financial assistance programs for persons with disabilities and mental health conditions. You've cited the example of the Basic Income Program in Quebec and the successful development of regulations with framework legislation. Recognizing that there are barriers and that some members of the disabled community may not currently benefit from these programs that you've quoted, why do you believe that the benefit should be implemented in this manner? And I think that that question should go to Monsieur Rago and Monsieur Prévost.
Certainement.
Thank you for your question, certainly. I think that if we want to give true access, we can do it step by step. You access through this benefit will provide access as well to people benefiting from the provincial or territorial programs. But we see this as a gateway that allows for greater access, but it's not the only gateway. We want to be able to provide quick access to a benefit, but there are people that will not have access, say, in Quebec. So we need to have additional methods, and the definition that is in the bill with respect to the Canada benefit on the Canada Disability Benefit, rather, would be a good gateway, a first step.
Monsieur Prévost.
Okay.
Mr. Prévost, I think that in Quebec's case, the basic income program, which began January last, accessibility is not complete in terms of access to the program. But in terms of other programs, you know, you have to start somewhere. You have to build on what you know, build on what exists, and try to improve it. If you want to have a perfect solution before you put something in place, before Parliament is dissolved, you're going to be looking at a 5, 10, 15-year further delay, and we want to avoid that.
Merci.
Thank you. Senator Petitclerc, followed by Senator Poirier. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My question goes ideally to all the witnesses if we have time. My question, Mr. Rago, you spoke very clearly to the needs that are there, that there are emergencies, there are people who need it now. And we recognize that sense of urgency. Are you confident there that through this legislation, and the minister was here and has said that the consultations are underway and are advancing, except that the regulatory process has to stand alone. There will be a report on that within a year's time. So technically speaking, that might take up to a year just to have a report on the regulatory process, which seems to me to be a bit long when you speak to urgency. So here's my question. Are you confident that it will move along as quickly as you think, as you seem to say, even though that is not prescribed in the legislation? Perhaps Mr. Rago could start to answer. Certainly. Thank you for your question. It's a very good question. The only thing that we do have is trust in the government, that the government will do the right thing. And to this issue of consultations and action undertaken at the federal level in terms of disabilities, the priorities of financial security for persons who are disabled. There are scientific articles that have been published by researchers looking at the bill and indicating that there has been a great deal of discussion about the indicator that is being used. Maybe there would be better indicators, but at least researchers have started to think about this, about the process, and we don't need to have something extremely complicated. I think really we should be thinking in terms of negotiations with the Treasury Board at the federal level, because that's a political matter that could lead to concessions. But we don't access that. And as far as the regulatory framework is concerned, no, we cannot access that. Yes, thank you. Mr. Lupien, do you have something to add? No? No.
Poirier?
Senator Poirier.
I appreciate both of your organizations for making the time to join us today. Your groups, along with 3 other organizations, jointly submitted a briefing to HUMA in the House in which you jointly write, women with disabilities are more likely to experience violence and financial abuse than the rest of the population. Therefore, it is essential to fully individualize the future benefits to limit financial dependency and abuse. In this sense, we believe that the benefit designs should not consider the spouse income, assets, or liquid asset. This would allow more women to have access to the benefit and thus strengthen their financial security, giving them more independence. So very briefly, I'd like to hear from Monsieur Lupin to confirm that this is still the wish of the Confederation, and then Monsieur Rago, since you authored the document, I'd like to hear you to elaborate how crucial it is that the Canada disability benefit be individualized.
Et puis, Monsieur Rago.
Mr. Lupien, it's true that persons who live with a disability face the situation where there will be an effect on the spouse's financial situation. I have gone through that with my wife. It is important, whether it's a man or a woman, or a woman rather, there's always the chance of violence. But men are faced with violence as well when they live with a disability. It is not just women. Therefore, it's, a disability goes beyond 65 years of age, but you have the cost of living that is extremely high for a person that costs me a lot more because of a disability. Thank you. Mr. Rago. Thank you for your question. Yes, it is something that is real and it is crucial. We know that persons with disabilities, women in particular, have to face violence very often, and there are intersectional difficulties as well. We know that one of the ways of lifting people out of that situation of oppression is to give them financial security. So whether you are a man or a woman, when you're living in this difficult situation, you need to have financial security to be able to prevent certain forms of violence. It's not going to correct the overall situation of violence in general, but that provides further levers to people to be able to avoid gender-based violence. So it is the right thing to do. It truly is an issue of principle, of basic fundamental principle, and Parliament, the Senate, has this exceptional opportunity to do the right thing in this circumstance.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Senator Osler, followed by Senator Bernard.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses. Ms. Durand-Loh, you expressed confidence that the regulatory process will be inclusive. And Clause 11.1 of Bill C-22 does require the minister to provide persons with disabilities meaningful and barrier-free opportunities to collaborate on the development of the regulations. And my question is for both organizations, all witnesses. How would you describe meaningful and barrier-free opportunities to collaborate? And how would you describe an inclusive regulatory and application process?
Microphone, please. Mr. Hago? Well, that's a very good question. There's no magic recipe for consultation that will be inclusive. For example, the people that we represent, those people who have intellectual disabilities, will have great difficulty following a discussion, for example, on poverty, on what that person wants, how they want to live. And in that instance, it would have to be someone near to them, their family or friend, that explains to them what the issue is. But it's not a matter of making the terms easy, but rather to make the statements easier to grasp. By definition, this legislation is complex and legal, but there are ways of making these very fundamental issues and questions very much more approachable for people who have these disabilities. So in Montreal or, say, in Quebec City, there are strategies that exist, I'm sure, at the federal level to deal with this type of thing. There are millions of dollars. They have there's so much money that's involved at the federal level that we say to ourselves, they must have keys. They must have ways of doing things to improve the situation. And we could have consultations by means of focus groups, by dealing with individuals, asking with them what their expectations are. That there would be a certain reach that would have to be made to be able to have the consultations and to learn from them. That would be a good means of knowing what to build on for the next round of consultations. Just to add, I think that at the provincial level in Quebec, we are of the same mind. We act in that same spirit. Because we represent thousands of people but we want to have faith in a mechanism that will provide a communication that is fluid and accessible insofar as possible. We have even asked people involved about the language used, and so I think it would be very, very good from the point of view of synergy. Yes, the Confederation of disabled persons in Quebec, we have some 45 regional and national members. And that involves people who who have hearing disabilities, people who have, say, sensitivity to multiple chemical products, all types of disabilities. And all our partners are there to help the federal government reach some sort of regulatory framework which would, in fact, lead to a rapid adoption of this legislation. That's what we hope.
Mr. Lupien?
Mr. Lupien, do you have anything to add? No. My colleague said everything that needed to be said. Thank you.
I did see flash up on the screen. Someone commented in the chat. Will those comments be captured in the witness testimony?
I'll ask our clerk to respond to
No, and I believe that comment's from the first panel, so.
That was from the first panel? Thank you very much.
Senator Bernard, have you
I do have one quick question, Madam Chair. Thank you. So thank you to all of the witnesses for being here. I'd like to ask a bit about the basic income in Quebec. If you could give us a bit more information about it. One of my questions would be, is it high enough to actually lift people out of poverty? And for persons with disabilities who may qualify for the basic income, does that basic income account for some of the hidden costs that we've heard other witnesses talk about?
who would like to start this round?
Je peux répondre.
I can answer, Madam Chair. The basic income program is intended for people who have very long-term disabilities that prevent them from participating in the labor market. And it doesn't, unfortunately, allow for them to be lifted out of poverty. Almost, but not quite. Now, with respect to the cost of disabilities, some costs are captured by additional benefits, but not all costs. There are certain costs that can exist and that are not compensated for in any way by an existing benefit. We are happy that this program exists, but there is a need for improvement. And a federal benefit would be able to provide for those people who already benefit from the provincial program much better financial security. What I can say is this. As a person who has a disability, further to an accident, say you lose your sight, you are not included in the program. Many people live beneath the poverty line. And so because of that fact, there are many people who are disabled but who cannot get above the poverty line. We don't know if this will be changed by the Quebec government, but for the moment we continue to live beneath the poverty line.
Merci.
Thank you.
Much, all of you. We have time for one more question on a second round if somebody has a question to ask. Senator Bury?
Yes, thank you so much for being here and for doing a little bit of a marathon session. So I'm going to go back to that poverty line and the use of the market basket measure. We heard from our previous witness in the first session that that measure is probably not the best measure to capture and alleviate poverty, especially for people living with disability with their increased needs. I would like to ask all of you to comment on that, because that measure, the market basket measure, is actually in the legislation. So what is going to happen if we can't really use it? Please comment.
Monsieur Rago?
Are you ready, Mr. Rago? Yes, of course, Madam Chair. I would say this. In terms of a regional equality in Canada throughout the country, that is perhaps the best measure that exists for a very simple reason. It is measured in terms of local costs for what is there, etc. But it does not take into consideration any additional costs due to a disability. In certain areas, there is a buffer that is added 10%, 20% to the consumer's basket, but it is very difficult to quantify the costs that are related to having a disability. And, you know, they say in the media you can use the normal consumer's basket and add a percentage to it. But when you look at it statistically, you know that you have to have more specific measures to account for the increased cost of having a disability. But overall, it's not a bad thing overall, but it's not a good thing to speak to disabilities. You know, a person in Vancouver shouldn't be poorer than a person in Montreal or in New Brunswick. Is there anybody else? I would like to thank you very sincerely for your participation today and for your contribution to our consideration of Bill